시작하면 조명 끌어갈게.
아, 조명 꺼달래?
그냥 조금만 끌어. 있잖아. 이렇게.
내리면 돼. 아, 저 위에 거를 좀 꺼야겠다.
그 두 개만.
In the meantime, I would like to invite you to find flyers on the table on this side of the room and also on the table in the back. It's the same set of 3 flyers that will give you some background on the Landscapes for People, Food, and Nature initiative that will be the focus of the session today, and will give you a little bit more depth of understanding of the initiative.
There's in the U.S. it's about 3%
조명 안 물어봐도 될 건가? 괜찮냐고 안 물어봐도 되겠지? 꺼달라고?
응, 꺼내려고 했어.
그래, 경험이
Welcome, everyone. This is the session on Landscapes for People, Food, and Nature. And it's subtitled Making the Case for Ecosystems and Food Security. So what we intend to do today is introduce you to an international initiative called the Landscapes for People, Food, and Nature Initiative that is helping to catalyze, spearhead, more intensive interest and exploration in the landscape approach to managing agriculture and natural resources for livelihood security, for biodiversity conservation, and for sustainable production. And then we're going to ask questions about how we can mainstream ecosystem thinking in food security policy, looking at the landscape approach as a vehicle or a tool for helping to do that. So I'm Louise Buck, and I am working with Eco-Agriculture Partners and their Landscapes and Leaders program. I'm also based at Cornell University in the United States in the Department of Natural Resources there. And we are presenting this session as a collaboration between the Landscapes for People, Food and Nature initiative as facilitated by Eco-Agriculture Partners and also IUCN. So I'd like to turn over the speaker to my co-host and collaborator in this session, Mark Smith.
Thank you, Louise. I'm Mark Smith. I'm the director of the water program, the global water program in IUCN in our headquarters in Switzerland. I'm also the focal point for developing IUCN's new program work on food security. So the kinds of things that we are talking about and working on today are very important for us in IUCN to learn what people are thinking and how we can bring landscapes, bring ecosystems management more centrally into food security work and then use that in developing and implementing IUCN's work in food security over the coming 4 years. In this session, I will be playing the role, we have a couple of panels to run, and I will be playing the role of moderator for those panels, so you will see me back with this microphone at that point. But for right now, to introduce the context of this session, of how we relate landscapes to food security, I want to hand back to Louise, who has a presentation for us.
Great, thank you, Mark. So I'm going to run through a few slides here just to orient you to what we're talking about today. So we're gathered here at the World Conservation Congress with leading practitioners and experts in integrated landscape management from different communities of practice to distill lessons learned for policymakers concerned with food security and to introduce the Landscapes for People, Food and Nature initiative as a vehicle for collaborative action to carry these messages forward. So this slide identifies what the integrated landscape or whole landscape approach to management is all about, what the multiple goals for integrated landscape management are. And we recognize here that we have diverse objectives for landscape management and that policies that are seeking to pursue each of these separately often quickly come into conflict. So many innovators around the world have begun working across sectors in what we call a whole landscape approach that uses stakeholder process, new science, traditional knowledge to find solutions that provide the full range of goods and services we need in our landscapes. There are many different entry points for integrated landscape management, and there's a host of terminology linked with it. When we launched the Landscapes for People, Food and Nature initiative, in November of 2011 in Nairobi, some 76 different terms were given to this concept. One of the terms has been referred to as eco-agriculture. That's how Eco-Agriculture Partners derived its name. That was one of the early terms to describe this. But we find that whole landscape management or integrated landscape management is a nice sort of generic term that seems to speak to many people. But many other terms are being used as well. These are just a few of those that are listed here. So, like I said, in November 2011, we launched the Landscapes for People, Food and Nature initiative. The organizations whose logos you see here are what we refer to as the co-organizers of the initiative. Base funding for the initiative comes from the Global Environmental Facility, and each of these co-organizing groups has contributed financial resources. In addition, we have several other forms of membership of the LPFN. We have an advisory group, we have strategic collaborators. IUCN is a strategic collaborator, and we're working on forming additional partnerships and collaborations. So we invite you and the organizations you may be representing to consider, as you listen to this session, to consider your possible interest in joining the LPFN. And that reminds me that there should be a sign-up sheet or a participant list that should be circulating here, and we encourage you to put your name and your organization and your email address on that. And we invite you to join this coalition of organizations and individuals who want to advance learning about the landscape approach. The LPFN has developed what we refer to as an action and advocacy strategy, and we have 6 components to the action and advocacy strategy that are listed here. The first one you see listed is going to gain the majority of attention in the coming 2 years. We're in the process now of selecting Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 landscapes. Tier 1 will be what we call focal landscapes, where we'll really intensify investment in learning about how landscape approaches work in diverse contexts. And there'll be about 12 of the so-called focal landscapes and landscape networks. And then in the Tier 2 and Tier 3 landscapes, we won't have quite the same level of financial resources to invest, but we'll choose those based on sort of the social energy, if you will, around those. And we hope over the coming years to develop networks across these landscapes through which we can intensify learning. And in order to support that learning, we have working groups on policy, business, finance, science, and knowledge, and then outreach and media, which is meant to communicate what we're doing in order to not only communicate lessons learned, but to engage additional landscapes in this learning effort. So we hope through all this work, eventually, as I mentioned, to influence policy platforms that are attempting to integrate ecosystem management into food security, desired food security outcomes. And that's going to be the focus of our discussion today. And Mark will be talking about the UN Zero Hunger Challenge as a focal point for thinking about how ecosystem management can help advance the food security agenda through integrated landscape management. So the key question that we want to try to focus on and get some insight into through our panel members today and through interaction with our audience members is, what messages should advocates of integrated landscape management approaches send to policymakers? So with that as a way of introduction, I would like to quickly, briefly outline the rest of the program for this morning. We will be having follow my presentation with what we're calling a keynote. It's a few comments on the role of landscapes in integrating food security and ecosystems. And the keynote presentation will be followed by brief presentations by panel members who've volunteered to make some comments about how they see the landscape approach adding value to this goal of getting ecosystem management thinking into food security agendas. Panel A's comments will hopefully stimulate thinking by audience members. There will be some facilitated interaction between the panel and the audience. Then Panel B will take their seats, And panel B will make some remarks about the policy challenges that we face in getting landscape approaches mainstreamed. And similarly, we'll follow with some comments, interaction in an effort to hear your thoughts about what you think about the questions that the panel B members have been asked. And after panel A and panel B and the subsequent discussion, we'll try to do a little bit of wrap up and see if we can synthesize some key messages out of all of this discussion that we can carry forward through the LPFN and through various other policy-oriented initiatives to try to mainstream this approach. So with that, I would like now to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Jeffrey Sayre. It's my great pleasure to have Jeffrey with us. I had the pleasure of working with Jeff when he was the founding Director General of the Center for International Forest Research, CIFOR. And I also had the pleasure of working with Jeff almost a decade before that when he was with World Wildlife Foundation and IUCN, helping to invent what in those days were called Integrated Conservation and Development Programs. Most of you probably remember those, ICDPs. I think of this landscape approach as an advanced generation of ICDP thinking.